12 men walked onto a transport in the summer of 1965. According to the story, only 7 of them ever came back. The other 5, 2 of them dead beneath an alien sun, 2 of them choosing never to return, and one whose fate the records simply refuse to name, vanished into a silence so complete that officially they were never there at all. Their fingerprints had been erased, their service records purged. Their families, the story claims, were told nothing because there was no longer anything to tell. According to the account, these were men who no longer existed on Earth, sent to live on a world that orbited a star 40 light-years away. And the strangest part is not where they went. The strangest part is how we supposedly found out. Picture a quiet corner of the internet in the autumn of 2005. Not a public forum, not a viral post, a private mailing list, a closed circle of UFO researchers who traded theories and documents among themselves. The list belonged to a man named Victor Martinez, a researcher who had spent years cultivating contacts in the shadow world where fringe belief brushes up against the intelligence community. His list was small. It was invitation only. The people on it considered themselves serious, the kind who had grown weary of obvious hoaxes and grainy photographs. And then, on November 2nd, 2005, an email arrived that none of them could explain away. It came from someone who signed only as Anonymous. And what Anonymous claimed was extraordinary even by the standards of that strange little community. He said he was an insider, a retired employee of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the branch of American intelligence that handles military secrets the public is never meant to see. He said he had decided, in the twilight of his life, to leak the details of a real black project, a program so deeply buried that its very existence had been compartmentalized away from the rest of the government. He gave it a name, Project Serpo. What unfolded over the following weeks was not a single revelation dumped all at once. That, in itself, is part of why people couldn't look away. The information came in installments, carefully staged, released piece by piece, each one answering some questions while opening others. It read like a controlled bleed, like someone, somewhere, was deciding exactly how much to tell and exactly when to tell it. This was not the breathless rambling of a man unburdening himself. This was measured, deliberate. It had the rhythm of a disclosure being managed, and the content of those installments was staggering. According to Anonymous, the story did not begin in 2005 or even in 1965. It began in the New Mexico desert in the summer of 1947, the Roswell incident, the most famous UFO event in history. The official record tells us that something crashed on a ranch outside Roswell, that the military first announced they had recovered a flying disc, and then, within a day, retracted it and called it a weather balloon. That contradiction has haunted the American imagination for nearly 80 years. But the Serpo account claimed to know what really happened. It claimed that more than wreckage was recovered from the desert. It claimed there were bodies, and it claimed this is where the story turns from the merely strange to the genuinely chilling, that one of the occupants survived. In the lore of Serpo, this survivor was given a designation, not a name, a category, EBE, extraterrestrial biological entity, a living, breathing being from another world, held in secret by the United States government, slowly recovering from injuries sustained in the crash. And over the years, the story goes, this entity learned to communicate. It became, in effect, a bridge, a translator between two species who otherwise had no way of understanding one another. And through that bridge, according to the account, an arrangement was made. The entity's people, the Serpo account calls them the Ebens, came from a planet in the Zeta-Reticuli star system. To the naked eye, Zeta-Reticuli is a faint double star visible only from the southern hemisphere, around 39 light-years from Earth. It is a real place. You can find it in the sky. And it had appeared in UFO lore before, most famously in the case of Betty and Barney Hill, the New Hampshire couple whose alleged 1961 abductions supposedly produced a star map pointing to that very system. So when Serpo named Zetareticuli, it was tapping into something that already lived in the mythology, something that already carried a charge. The arrangement, the story claims, was an exchange, a diplomatic gesture between worlds. The Ebens would host a small group of human beings on their homeworld, a planet the account names Serpo, and those humans would live there, observe, learn, and eventually return to tell what they had seen. An exchange program. Not unlike the cultural exchanges nations on Earth conduct with one another. Except the destination was a planet around another star, and that brings us to the 12. According to the files, the team was assembled with extraordinary care. 12 military personnel. Most accounts say 10 men and 2 women, though the numbers shift in the retelling, and the figure most people remember is simply 12. They were handpicked, screened for intelligence, for physical endurance, for psychological stability. They were unmarried. They had no children. And here the story takes on a quality that is hard to shake, because the precautions described are not the precautions of fiction. They are the precautions of a program that genuinely never expected these people to come home the same. The team members were sterilized before departure. Think about what that implies. Whoever planned this did not want human biological material left behind on an alien world, or did not want whatever the journey might do to a human body to be passed on to a future generation. Their identities were stripped away. New names were assigned. Their existing service records were purged from the system, erased, as though these 12 people had simply been deleted from the institutional memory of the United States military. And that detail is the one that lingers. Because if it were true, if 12 real human beings had their identities erased by design, then there would be no way to trace them. No way to find a grieving mother, a former classmate, a name on a roster. The erasure was not just secrecy, it was engineering. It was building a program in which the participants could never be confirmed to have existed, no matter how hard anyone looked. The perfect secret is not one that is merely hidden. It is one in which the people who could expose it have been quietly subtracted from the record. The departure, according to the account, took place in July of 1965 from a remote site in the Nevada desert. The team boarded an Eben craft, and then they were gone. Gone from the Earth, gone from the only world any human being had ever known, carried across 39 light-years of empty space to a planet they had only been told about. What they supposedly found there is the heart of the legend. The account claims the team kept a journal, a team log, recording their observations day by day, and the first thing that broke down, according to those entries, was time itself. Serpo, the story says, orbited within a binary star system, 2 suns, and a world with 2 suns is a world without true darkness. The team described a sky in which, when one sun set, the other still hung in the heavens. Objects cast double shadows, 2 faint overlapping silhouettes stretching out from every rock and every body, shifting as the suns moved independently across the sky. There was no real night, only a kind of perpetual reddish twilight that never fully released the world into darkness. And under those 2 suns, the human sense of time simply came apart. The team had been trained, they had instruments, schedules, a calendar to keep, but the account describes how that calendar became impossible to maintain. A day on Serpo did not match a day on Earth. The planet's rotation, its long looping orbit between 2 stars, none of it aligned with the rhythms a human body is built around. The team reportedly lost track. The log entries grew confused, the dates uncertain. They could no longer say with confidence how long they had been there. The sun that never set had stolen their ability to count. And there is something deeply unsettling about that particular detail. Because if you wanted to invent a story about astronauts on an alien world, you might describe monsters or wars or wonders. You probably would not think to describe the slow, grinding psychological disorientation of losing your grip on time. That detail does not read like spectacle. It reads like displacement. It reads like the genuine, creeping horror of a human mind unmoored from every cycle it evolved to depend on. Sleep, waking, the comfort of darkness that promises morning. On Serpo, the morning never ended, and it never quite began. The mission had been planned, according to the files, to last 10 years, a decade on an alien world, and then home. It lasted 13. The account is hazy on exactly why. Some versions suggest the team simply lost track of when the pickup was supposed to occur. Others suggest the ebon craft did not return on schedule. Whatever the reason, 3 extra years stretched out under those 2 suns. 3 additional years of twilight, of double shadows, of a calendar that no longer meant anything. 3 years that no one had prepared for. And in those years, the human cost began to mount. Because not all 12 came home. The story claims that 2 of the team members died on Serpo. The accounts of how vary. Some say illness, some say the environment itself, the radiation of 2 stars working slowly on bodies that were never meant to endure it. They were buried, the story goes, on that alien world, beneath a sky that never went dark. 2 human beings, lying in alien soil 40 light years from the planet of their birth, marked by graves that no one on Earth would ever visit. And then there were the 2 who chose to stay. This is perhaps the eeriest turn in the entire account. The story claims that when the time finally came to leave, 2 members of the team declined. They chose to remain on Serpo, to live out the rest of their lives among the Ebons, on a world with 2 suns, rather than return to the Earth they had left 13 years before. The files offer no real explanation. They simply state it as fact. 2 people looked at the prospect of going home and decided that the alien world had become home instead. What does it take, you have to wonder, for a human being to make that choice? To look across all those light years toward the pale blue dot where they were born, where everyone they had ever known still lived, and to turn away from it. Had Serpo changed them so completely? Had 13 years under 2 suns rewritten something fundamental inside them? Or had they simply understood, by then, that they could never truly come home? That the people who had left in 1965 no longer existed, and the people who remained belonged nowhere on Earth? We will never know, because they supposedly never came back to tell us. So of the 12 who departed in 1965, the account claims 7 returned in 1978, 13 years older, aged beyond their years in fact. Worn down, the story says, by radiation, by the strain of an alien environment, by the sheer psychological weight of what they had endured, they came home to a world that had moved on without them, a world that had gone to the moon and come back, fought a war in Vietnam, changed its music and its politics and its faces. They had been erased from it before they left. Now they returned as ghosts to a planet that no longer had any record they had ever lived, and they did not last long. The account claims that most of the 7 survivors died within a few years of their return. Their bodies, supposedly, were failing, broken by the journey, by the exposure, by whatever had happened to them out there. They had crossed the gulf between stars and come back alive, only to fade away quietly in the aftermath, carrying memories they could share with no one. Imagine being one of those men. Imagine knowing what you had seen: 2 suns, double shadows, the graves of your friends in alien soil, and knowing that you could never speak of it, that your own country had erased you, that the world around you believed none of it could possibly be real. Imagine dying with that locked inside you. That is the story of Project Serpo. And for the people on Victor Martinez's mailing list, in the winter of 2005, it landed with the force of revelation. But of course, almost from the beginning, there were doubts. And the doubts, in the end, are nearly as strange as the story itself. The most obvious problem was the most fundamental one. There were no documents. For all the detail in the installments, the dates, the descriptions, the team logs, there was never a single verifiable piece of paper, no declassified file, no photograph, no physical artifact, just emails, arriving in installments from a man who would not say who he was. Researchers tried to trace the source. They examined the writing, the technical claims, the chronology, and the consensus that gradually formed was that Project Serpo was a hoax, an elaborate work of fiction seeded into a credulous community by someone who knew exactly how to make it sing. But here is where it gets complicated, because when investigators tried to identify Anonymous, the trail did not lead to some bored teenager or attention-seeking fantasist. The trail, according to those who looked into it, seemed to lead back toward people connected to the intelligence community itself, toward figures with links to the Defense Intelligence Agency, the very agency the leak claimed to expose. The fingerprints on the hoax, faint as they were, appeared to belong to insiders. And that raises a question that no one has ever satisfactorily answered. If Project Serpo was simply a hoax, why would people inside an intelligence agency take the trouble to construct it? The answer that emerged years later was not, it was fiction. The answer that emerged was a single, far more unsettling word: disinformation. Insiders, over time, suggested that parts of the Serpo material may have been deliberate disinformation, information crafted and released by the intelligence community for a purpose. And notice the precise shape of that admission. They did not say it was a story someone made up for fun. They said it was disinformation. That is a term of art. It means a controlled release of false or misleading material planted with intent, designed to produce an effect. You do not call something disinformation unless there was an apparatus behind it, unless someone, somewhere, decided to put it into the world and watch what happened. But disinformation about what? That is the maddening gap at the center of this whole affair. Because disinformation is rarely pure invention. The most effective disinformation works precisely because it is wrapped around a kernel of something real, a true detail hidden inside a cloud of false ones, so that no one can tell where the lie ends and the secret begins. That is the whole point of the technique. You bury the thing you want to hide inside a story so outlandish that anyone who stumbles onto the truth will dismiss it as part of the hoax. So consider what the admission actually leaves us with. The skeptics won the argument. Project Serpo was not a real exchange program. There are no documents. The whole thing was almost certainly seeded into that mailing list on purpose. But the very people best positioned to know did not close the door by calling it fiction. They called it disinformation, and in doing so, they left the door open just a crack. They admitted that a real agency may have planted it, and they never said why. They never explained what it was meant to accomplish. Whether it was a psychological experiment, a test of how a story propagates through a community, a way of muddying the waters around something else entirely, or something stranger still, they would not say. The reason remains classified, or simply unspoken to this day, and that is the part that refuses to settle. If you wanted to discredit a true story, this is exactly how you might do it. You would take the truth and surround it with so much extravagant detail, 2 suns, double shadows, 13 lost years, that the world would laugh it off. The believers would embrace the wildest version, the skeptics would dismiss the whole thing, and the actual secret, whatever it was, would sink quietly out of view, protected forever by ridicule. A hoax hides nothing, but disinformation is a thing you build around something you are trying to bury. So, we are left with 12 men who, according to the record, never existed. A program that the documents cannot confirm and the insiders will not quite deny. A story dismissed as a hoax by the same breath that calls it disinformation. And a planet somewhere out past the southern stars, where the account says 2 graves and 2 living souls remain beneath a sky that never goes dark. 7 came home, the story says. 5 did not, and nobody, not the researchers who tore the story apart, not the insiders who admitted they had planted it, has ever been able to tell us with anything like certainty whether those 12 men were pure invention or whether the lie was built to hide the truth of where they really went. So I'll leave you with the question that has never been answered. If Project Serpo was nothing but a hoax, why did the people who would know call it disinformation instead of fiction? And what do you think really happened to those 12 men whose names were erased before they ever left the ground? If you have a theory, I want to hear it. Tell me in the comments and stay with me in the dark, where the next unexplained case is already waiting.